Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
It's time for another edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbitt, and with me is Justin Gay. He's the boss around here. He's got all the show notes. But Justin, I've got to get to you a little bit in this teaser about Adam Gase. Yes, the New York Jets have hired a new head coach. I'm not really sure what happened in the press conference the other day, and as a Jets fan, I was really nervous. Now, there's a lot of listeners to this show that may or may not know that I'm a Jets fan. I know a lot of you know that I'm an Eagles fan, because we just went through the playoffs and the Eagles obviously were a contender for a little bit. But Justin, we haven't talked about the Jets since really week 2 or 3, other than them maybe trying to improve their draft stock and get Sam Darnold some help. And we knew that Todd Bowles was going to be fired, and we talked about that a little bit. But I wanted to remind the listeners just about the quirkiness of why Eric, yes, at Talkback Eric on Twitter, you can hit me up with your comments on this. Why is Eric a Jets fan and an Eagles fan? That doesn't seem to make any sense. So here's a little bit of history on that. I am from the state of New York. I was born in New York, so a lot of my family, as I was young and growing up, I was kind of brought into either the Mets or the Yankees. A couple of family members like the Mets, a couple of them like the Yankees. And then with football, a lot of them were Buffalo or the Jets. Now, I happen to pick the Mets and the Jets, so I've always hated the Yankees, and really, even since the early 90s, I didn't care about Buffalo embarrassing the family lineage because I was just involved in the Jets embarrassing the family lineage for decades. But older in my life, I moved to Pennsylvania. I really consider myself a Pennsylvania native because I've spent over 30 years in the state of Pennsylvania. And so after going to college in Pennsylvania as well, it just seemed like of the two main cities that have sports teams, that would be Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, I settled on the Philadelphia market. I went to college out there. Justin and I met out there. That's where we both went to college, in the city of Philadelphia. So it only made sense that I gravitated toward the Philadelphia Eagles as well. Now, what gets a little goofy is once you get to like baseball, Justin, because as you know, I'm a Mets fan. Phillies don't bother me or anything, but I don't root for the Phillies. And we'll get into that a little bit later with the potential for some of the baseball talks that we're going to have. But I'm a Mets fan and an Eagles fan. It's kind of odd that way. I'm a Jets fan. The good news is they don't ever bother each other, Jets being in the AFC and the Eagles in the NFC. And let's be honest, they're never going to play each other in the Super Bowl. And then when it comes to the other sports, I stayed with Philly. I'm a Flyers fan and I'm a Sixers fan. So even though I'm a huge LeBron fan, as we've talked about, I've never really been a Cavaliers fan or a Heat fan or a Lakers fan. I'm a fan of LeBron James, but the Sixers are my NBA team, and same with Philadelphia. So I did want to give the listeners a little bit of a background on that, because in just a moment, before we start the show, I want to ask you, Justin, what in the world is going on with Adam Gase? But before that, fill us in. I know you're a Broncos fan. I know a lot about you in terms of where you like to root for your sports, but tell the listeners a little bit across the avenue of baseball and football and basketball. Where do you land on everything?
Well, you said it there. I'm a biggest fan of the Denver Broncos. Been a fan since I was a little kid. Started with the color orange, and I've just followed them ever since. Back in the days where my parents, it wasn't as easy to just get whatever apparel you wanted. My parents actually had to call and have stuff special ordered in from Denver to different stores in the area. That's the only way we could really get Bronco stuff back then. So NFL, it's Denver. We spent time in the Philly area. I did an internship with the Sixers, worked with them on their sales side and sort of up in the corporate suite side for a while. So I've always gravitated towards the Sixers. I'm not a huge hockey fan. Pull for the Capitals, stay local with them, and baseball the same way. I'm an Orioles fan, Phillies fan, so really haven't had a whole lot to root for, especially from the Orioles side. And the way that AL East looks, I may not have much to root for a while till all these first-round picks that they'll have, these high draft picks, hopefully they'll hit on, and in like 5 or 6 years, they'll be back on top as their farm system gets good. But yeah, that's where my allegiances lie. But man, your boy Adam Gase, I'm a little concerned for you because I don't know what in the world is going on. We were having some fun with it on Twitter, and I was DMing you some stuff I found, and people were having a blast with it, going crazy with his. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It just looks like they had him in the back, and they took a bag off of his head, and it put him out there in the press conference, and he's like staring at the lights like, where am I? I really took this job?
Yeah, was he kidnapped to be the Jets head coach? I mean, I don't think you have to be kidnapped to be the head coach of the New York Jets after you were sort of a quote-unquote failure down in Miami, but it sure looked like he was as shocked as anyone. And if you look at that press conference, at some times, I would swear that the guy sitting to his left, if you're looking at the press conference, it's on the right of the screen, but he's actually looking sometimes at Adam Gase, and I think he's sitting there thinking, what the hell have we just done? Because this guy looks absolutely lost. I mean, there was a lot of people speculating on Twitter whether or not he was high, whether or not he was on some kind of drugs. I doubt that that's the case, and that's what makes me so nervous. We've just hired a head coach of the Jets who is supposed to be this offensive genius that somehow never put together a good offense in Miami to be the savior after years and years of defensive coaches, and yet he looks completely lost. I am so irritated by this, and Sam Darnold's all in on this guy. So I'm very confused. As a Jets fan, I think we're heading into 2019 thinking, what in the world is going on? Now we've hired potentially Greg Williams. I think that's almost a lock at this point. The ink isn't quite dry on that, but I think all things are pointing to Greg Williams coming in, and he's kind of a nutcase at some points too. So go Jets. What can I say?
Well, the only good news is if they have that 10-year challenge, in 10 years from now, Adam Gase will be the only person that'll actually look better in 10 years than he does now.
Someone sent me a meme today of Vladimir Putin with sort of the same expression on his face.
Oh, boy.
And it was frighteningly similar to the way Adam Gase looks. So I think we'll end the beginning of the show on that note because who knows, maybe Adam Gase is a Russian operative for the New York Jets? I don't know.
Bob Mueller, line one.
This week's show is going to be fantastic. There's a whole lot of NFL, obviously. We've got to wrap up those divisional rounds. The games weren't quite as good as we expected, and Justin will lead us through all of that action from this past weekend. And then we'll talk about our predictions for the championship rounds at each of the conferences, AFC and NFC, who we think is going to the Super Bowl. And then, of course, we'll wrap up the show with some NBA news, what's hot around the league. That's coming right at you in episode 233 of Talk Back.
Well, we have made it to the conference championship round of the NFL playoffs. Let's start with the NFC. We know which two teams will be playing this coming Sunday. Let's talk about how we got to this matchup. Let's take it back to Saturday night. The LA Rams got their first win under the Sean McVay, Jared Goff era. And really, they didn't need a whole bunch from Jared Goff because their run game absolutely demolished the Cowboys. The first time since the mid-90s that two running backs on the same team in a playoff game both went over 100 yards in this game. So Jared Goff had the big run at the end that sealed this game off, kept the Rams from having to punt the ball back to the Cowboys. He didn't have to do a lot in the air, only about 181 yards in this game, but he did play a pretty nice game. They really controlled this game really from about the second quarter on. But based on what you saw from Jared Goff, what we sort of saw at the beginning of the year, then kind of that dip towards the middle end of the year, kind of got it going there the last two games of the regular season, but now he's got his first playoff win. So did he do enough to cement himself as trustworthy to you as they advance to this round of the conference finals here in the NFL?
Yeah, I actually think he did. Although he didn't have any touchdowns and he didn't have a high yardage total, he did find a couple of receivers. He spread the ball around. Woods has 6 receptions and Cooks had 4. They even got the tight end involved. So he didn't throw any interceptions. He didn't have anything that was, terrible in terms of turnovers. He did fumble it, but didn't lose that fumble. Jared Goff just wasn't needed in terms of a 400-yard performance in this game. It felt to me like McVay had a game plan with how well C.J. Anderson was playing coming into this game, and whether or not Todd Gurley was going to be fully healthy. The news on him was that he was feeling a lot better. The problems that he was having in his knee had kind of subsided. But with having a two-headed monster in that backfield with the hotness of C.J. Anderson lately, which I'm sure the Raiders and the Panthers and even the Broncos, they're wondering what in the world is going on with this guy. He is having a re-emergence in the NFL, at least temporarily. And to me, Justin, I don't think Goff was a whole lot of the game plan in this one. I felt like McVay was committed to the run. The fact that both running backs had over 100 yards, I think, was just nice, but I think it was part of the plan that they were both going to get a lot of carries. They both played well. They didn't put the ball on the ground. They got the yardage they needed. And I think what was most impressive to me in terms of your question about whether or not Jared Goff was, underperforming, or you look at C.J. Anderson and what he was doing on first downs. He was ripping off a 5, 6, 7-yard run a lot of times on first down, putting them in that second and short, third and short situation. And so I just don't think you saw Goff needing to air the ball out the way that he might have needed to in the past. It's a game plan that appeared to work to me, and whether it was to, keep the Dallas offense off the field or control the time of possession, I'm not really sure. But I don't think it's McVay not trusting Goff, and so I think they can kind of mold and change colors like a chameleon, and they're going to need to against the Saints, I believe, this coming week.
What's amazing is the fact that Dallas had been so good against the run from a defensive standpoint. And they absolutely got run over. I mean, I don't even know what his game plan was at that point, or if the run was working so well that he just basically scrapped whatever they had and just went right in with the run game. I mean, the talk before the game was Todd Gurley, it was his first game in a month, but from a cardio standpoint, they were going to try to take care of him and run C.J. Anderson more. But I can't fathom that in their game plan, they thought, okay, we're going to run the ball 48 times for almost 275 yards in this game. I just can't imagine that they thought that.
I'd have to agree with that. But the other thing I'm thinking is maybe McVay is just good enough to switch up his plan. However, he's also potentially smart enough that he might have seen something over the past couple of weeks. Let's not forget, when we're going to talk about this, basically the theme of the show, that all of these home teams had an extra week to prepare. Did McVay see something on the defensive line of the Cowboys that, yes, although they had played well the past few weeks to get to this point, did he feel like his guards and his tackles could expose some holes and open some lanes for these guys? And I agree with you. I don't think he pictured, a 273-yard total out of their rushing game, but he might have at least thought we can control the game with this rushing attack with two guys based on some things I'm seeing. I don't know. That's speculation on my part, but it just felt to me like he went with it. And like you said, whether he changed it after the first few runs or not, I think McVay's smart enough to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why you see so many teams that are trying to get into that McVay coaching tree, because they do see the fact of the ability to in-game adjust. A guy who has his quarterback go to the line and he's talking to him all the way up until the play clock gets to 15 seconds when it gets cut off. So he's adapted to things, and I'm sure he adapted in this game very well. And you're right. He may have went back through and looked at that Colts game where they ran all over Dallas as well in Indy. And he may have found something there where he felt like, look, the Rams line is a line that has played together a lot. They're a unit that's been able to stay healthy. So maybe, to your point, maybe he just felt like, okay, if we do what I think we can do, and they're more concerned with taking away the deep shots down the field, and we're just going to run the ball all over him. And I think once he had success doing that, he sort of just stuck with it. But Eric, you talk about the fact you have one coach on one side that is able to adapt to his offense. This was an 8-point game. Dallas was driving. They got to a 4th and 1. Jason Garrett had been aggressive in this game, going for it on 4th down several times, and they had run some different stuff. They had gotten Zeke on the edges, but on this particular play, in this crucial situation, they ran Zeke straight up the middle, and the two guys on the Rams defense who were having the best game was Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh, and they ran right at him. And they failed to convert on that, and it really changed the course of the game at that point. So do we have the right to criticize that play call because it was so predictable at that point?
I've always wondered that. I think it's a great question because not in just this game, but in many games throughout history. Even as a Penn State Nittany Lions fan, right? One of the worst things they always do is run up the middle, 3 and out. And I'm like, what in the world? Change your play calling or something. Now, in this instance, you have a guy like Zeke Elliott, who, by all accounts this year, was a fantastic runner and could run either up the middle or on the edge and was fairly successful all year long. In this game, not so much. So I think there was something to be said for needing to mold your game plan and make a split-second decision that didn't include running Zeke right up the middle at